Hello viewers, you find me in my bathroom for reasons I promise you I will explain. And don't worry, you're not going to see anything weird, I hope. It's just that I need to make a transformation for which I need my mirror and my sink. I need to transform into a plausible Jehovah's Witness because, as some of you may remember, I was recently invited to the local English-speaking congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses here in Zagreb. I do every now and then like to visit Kingdom Halls and sit in on Jehovah's Witness meetings, if only from an observer point of view. So I'm not completely alien to doing this. Well, obviously I'm not alien to doing it because I'm an ex-Jehovah's Witness and I grew up going to Kingdom Halls. But even in the last few years, I've been to Kingdom Hall meetings. I've just never recorded doing so on the channel. And in this video, that will hopefully change. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. It could be that things go badly. It could be that I get recognized. Maybe I have a reputation in Zagreb, who knows? But before I can even think about getting in the car and going to the meeting, I first need to get rid of my disheveled hair. Well, not get rid of it, I'm not going to shave it, but I need to make it tidy, and I also need to get rid of my stubble. The things I do for YouTube. So it looks like I've managed to shave without making myself bleed. Yay! Now I need to get out of my Star Wars t-shirt and into a suit and tie. Actually, no, before I do that, I need to wet my hair. You see, my hair is curly, and so it kind of naturally leans towards disheveled. But if I comb it when it's wet, usually it can stay a little bit neat and tidy, which it needs to be if I'm to pass for a JW. Now back to the suit and tie. I wear ties so rarely nowadays that I actually honestly have to concentrate on how to do the loop. And then what you don't want is like a Donald Trump tie that goes all the way down to your feet almost. This is actually the only tie I have. At least, no, I think I have more ties than this, but just this is the only tie I have with me for formal occasions. This is the one I wore in Parliament. Thumbnail here if Tibor is gracious. So, let's see. And this shirt requires cufflinks, which I don't have, so I'm just gonna have to roll my sleeves up. Now I need to do my hair. And that is JW hair. This should pass for a JW. I've got my tie, I've got my shirt, jacket. How am I looking? The name's Bond. Yeah, I think that'll do. I also have these books which Tibor brought from Ramacro. I asked him to bring a regular sized silver sword and he brought the big one. Thanks, Tibor. But I have a songbook which is significant. I guess both of these items are good because they're both not items that you could easily pick up on a cart. So if I walk in holding these, I'm immediately, with my suit and everything, going to give the impression that I am actually a Jehovah's Witness. So all that remains now is to actually drive to the meeting. And to be clear, my plan here is not to confront, not to cause a scene, to be an observer, maybe to get into some conversations with people at the Kingdom Hall, giving the impression that I am a Jehovah's Witness without needing to lie. I don't want to have to lie. If someone walks up to me and asks me outright, are you disfellowshipped or are you in good standing? I'm going to have to be honest with them and say, yes, actually, I'm disassociated or I'm not in good standing. But if people just run off the assumption that I'm a Jehovah's Witness, there are things that I can say that can help sustain that assumption. And hopefully the end product will be a video where you get to see what happens when you walk into a Kingdom Hall, even though we'll be very, very limited in terms of actual visual footage, because obviously it's going to look suspicious if I'm walking around filming everywhere I go. So it's going to be audio only for most of this video, and that's assuming they don't kick me out when I get there. So I'm on my way to the meeting. I'm a little bit more stressed than I would like to be because I'm a little bit more behind schedule than I planned. I've had to kind of test my equipment, my audio equipment, to make sure I can record without it looking obvious that I'm recording audio. I'm hoping it will work. I'm a little bit nervous. I'm always nervous about going to Kingdom Halls for various reasons that I'm sure you all understand. But I'm going by myself on this occasion, which makes me doubly nervous. Usually I have someone else that I can kind of lean on a little bit. And yeah, there's a very, very real likelihood, I guess, that they might not even let me take a seat. Or if I do take a seat, they ask me to leave. I'm hoping that that won't be the case. I'm hoping it's a little bit like with the Borg on Star Trek. As long as you pose no threat to them, you can walk freely among them, you know? So that's basically the plan, is to just kind of walk among them, act like them, talk like them, without hopefully needing to lie. And that's hoping that I can get there with sufficient time to find a seat and ingratiate myself with whoever's sitting near me.
From 1 Chronicles 13, I was curious why Uzzah was in this situation to begin with. So years and years passed, the Philistines had taken the ark. When they returned it, they brought it to Uzzah's father's home of Abinadab. So for 70 years, Uzzah's family had guarded the ark. So now he and his brother Ahio are leading this parade with the ark back into Jerusalem. So it just made me think maybe because he had been familiar with the ark, he had become a little relaxed in his view of Jehovah's view of it, or maybe he had some personal attachment to it. We don't know the exact reason, but something caused him to feel as if it was okay for him to reach out and touch this ark. So it just was a reminder for me to not to let familiarity with having a relationship with Jehovah make things less important in my mind just because I've known Jehovah.
Yes, good, thank you.
Well, this is awkward. Apologies, viewers, but I must interject at this point. This is future me. Obviously, we're watching footage that was filmed or recorded a couple of weeks ago now, when my hair was a different colour. And quite a bit has happened since then. And it's got to the point where we're editing this video, Tibor and I, and we're realising that it would be best for me to treat it a bit more like a rebuttal, rather than simply letting you listen to bits of meeting without me really having anything meaningful to say or any explanation as to why I found these particular parts interesting. I'm going to interject for the few parts of the meeting that I recorded, if that makes sense. And we begin with some comments about Uzzah and the ark. The guy making this comment, I don't know his name, and if I did know his name, I wouldn't obviously share it publicly because that would be a breach of privacy. But the guy giving this comment ends up giving a talk later on in the meeting, as we're going to see, but he's referring to 1 Chronicles 13, verses 9 and 10, which reads as follows. But when they came to the threshing floor of Chidon, Uzzah thrust his hand out and grabbed hold of the ark, for the cattle nearly upset it. At that, Jehovah's anger blazed against Uzzah, and he struck him down because he had thrust his hand out to the ark, and he died there before God. This was always a verse that I struggled with as a Jehovah's Witness. Here we have an extremely heavy-handed reaction to what is essentially a well-meaning act. So the Ark of the Covenant, arguably the most sacred relic for the Israelites, is being transported, and the cattle nearly upset it. And to stop this sacred relic being damaged, this man named Uzzah reaches out to grab it, to stop it from falling. And because this is deemed sacrilegious in some way, we assume, Jehovah executes him on the spot. And the gentleman who is responding, well, he doesn't need to respond to this verse. Just by way of context, this is part of the meeting where the group or congregation is commenting on a passage of scripture that they have been assigned to read. So in this case, this passage comprising a number of chapters in the Bible includes this particular verse, and the gentleman giving the comment has singled out this verse for comment. So he doesn't need to comment on it. He's chosen it because he finds it interesting. And it's almost like you can hear his brain trying to exert itself in mental gymnastics to try and come up with some kind of explanation that makes God somehow not an utter psychopath when he does this. So we hear him say words to the effect of, I was trying to find out why Uzzah was in this situation to begin with. So his mind has immediately gone to, God can't have done anything wrong here. The problem must be with Uzzah, which is blame the victim mentality of the sort that is rife among Jehovah's Witnesses. You know, what's wrong with the person who suffered most in this situation that caused this terrible thing to happen to them? That's immediately where his mind has gone. And I would argue it's nothing necessarily devious or sinister about him as a person. It's the way he's been trained to think. What's wrong with Uzzah that's caused this to happen? And he comes up with this convoluted explanation or hypothesis that Uzzah, through familiarity with the ark, had become overly relaxed about it. I'm not sensing here a relaxed situation. I'm sensing here something that happened on the spur of the moment with no notice. It was an instinctive thing that's being described here. We can only go off what's being described, and what's being described is very much a momentary, spur-of-the-moment situation where, again, a sacred relic is at risk of being damaged, and this man named Uzzah tries to stop this sacred relic from being damaged. And in order to make Jehovah somehow the good guy in all of this, this Jehovah's Witness gentleman has come up with this hypothesis that it was all ultimately Uzzah's fault because he had become relaxed or overly familiar with the Ark of the Covenant.
The first things we need to ask ourselves about what my wardrobe is look like. How I wear carrying that week. If I going somewhere where maybe Jesus will be Jesus ashamed because of my clothes? Or maybe question is, if I'm going to some parties, will people say, oh, this is Jehovah Witness. Do you see how he has nice clothes? Also, we can ask ourselves, what movies I watching or what kind of music I listen. We know that music has different value towards people. But is question what music we listen. If Jesus with us is this music what he will listen with us, or quite the music we should mention in the highlights of this week in Leviticus, in Deuteronomy chapter 16. Also, young ones likes to play the video games. If I borrow my cell phone or tablet to Jesus, and he saw what video games I played, he will be how I will explain him why I love that video games. From this talk, we saw that we need to show gratitude for all the things that our friend made to us savings our life. If we do that, we will not ask how I can do this, because we know the cost of everlasting life is the most expensive of all other things what we can have.
I really struggled to suppress my laughter during this part of the meeting. So we've just been listening to a Jehovah's Witness gentleman give a part on the Apply Yourself to the Field Ministry segment of the meeting. He has the final item, which is a 5-minute talk with the theme, The Love the Christ Has Compels Us. And it's evident from the material that's been chosen for him. Again, he doesn't get to just go away and find his own material. He's literally told, this is the material you need to use. In this case, it's a January 2016 Watchtower pages 13 to 14. Be compelled by God's indescribable free gift. So he keeps talking about Jesus and how would Jesus feel about things. Will Jesus be ashamed because of my clothes, was one question he put to his audience. He then goes on to talk about movies and music. And the part where I really struggled to kind of suppress my laughter was when he addressed young ones in the audience and said, imagine if you lend or borrow your tablet to Jesus, what's he going to think of the games that you play? And are you going to feel comfortable explaining why you like certain games on your tablet to Jesus? That just raised such an odd mental image of Jesus inspecting people's digital devices to see what they're deriving fun and entertainment from, in this case, children or young ones. But how telling that this is what it means to be a Jehovah's Witness. You need to not just have this level of paranoia about what forms of entertainment you enjoy or what clothes you wear. You need to be able to get on a platform and advocate this paranoia as normal to the rest of your congregation.
So Jehovah tells us the truth by saying that we'll all experience trials. He promises to help us because we're precious to him and he loves us. We can only receive Jehovah's help, though, if we're close to him. Well, in what ways can we draw closer to Jehovah? There's 3 in particular that we want to focus on. The first one, obviously, is prayer. We're free to speak with Jehovah about every aspect of our life. When Paul wrote this verse cited from Philippians, he was in prison. So he knew from personal experience that our circumstances have the ability to divide our minds and rob us of joy. He said that when this happens, though, we need to plead with Jehovah for help. The result will be a calmness and tranquility that for this situation seems unimaginable. Perhaps we can have our photo put up as we consider the second way that Jehovah helps us, which is by means of our meetings. Hebrews chapter 10, 24 and 25 tells us that we should meet together for the purpose of showing love and encouraging one another, all the more so as you see the day drawing near. As the conclusion of the system of things reaches an end, we may face situations we never have before, and our trials will intensify. What trials do you think this family experienced during the pandemic that perhaps they had never dealt with before? Did they deal with the loneliness that comes from isolation? Perhaps the frustration that may come from being confined together in a small area? Or perhaps the worry that could have been a result of wondering how they would keep their family spiritually strong, their children as well. This family is effectively using the virtual meetings Jehovah's provided as a source of mutual encouragement because they want to take full advantage of the help that Jehovah's Spirit provides.
So we're listening to the same gentleman who gave the comment before about Uzzah and the Ark of the Covenant. He has now the talk, become Jehovah's friend, pay attention at the meetings, which makes up the living as Christians part of the meeting, or the first part of that part of the meeting. And when he's referring to this family, if Tibor is gracious, you'll see an image appear, which is actually in the meeting workbook. So it might be confusing if you're just listening to the audio and he's saying this family, you might be thinking, what family? But he's referring to, I think it was this illustration, although in my mind, I could have sworn there was a different illustration that flashed on the screen that was similar to this one. In any case, this gives you an idea of what was being commented on, and indeed this is the illustration that witnesses are looking at in their workbooks. He's referring to this family as though they are a real family, even though it's an illustration. I just found it fascinating that this gentleman who's giving the talk is referring to the people in this photograph, let's say, as being a real family in a real situation that we just happen to be looking in on, rather than a staged situation. This family is deriving comfort from their participation in a virtual meeting. Well, no, they're not, because it's a staged situation. So we're not talking about a real situation, a real family, or real people. And this is one of the elements of Jehovah's Witness propaganda that really infuriates me. The way they will, for example, during JW broadcasting episodes, show a dramatization and then comment on it afterwards by saying things like, as we saw, our brother made this decision, or our sister said this. Well, they're not our brother or our sister because they're fictional characters. And yet they're being described as being real in some way. Maybe it's just me, I just find that whole thing of dissecting images or video dramatizations as though they are real incredibly infuriating.
The third way that Jehovah helps us is by means of our ministry. How much satisfaction do you feel when you're able to share a truth from the scriptures or help someone to understand a deeper Bible teaching? Don't you feel happier when you're able to help improve their lives in this way?
Notice the question isn't, do you feel satisfaction in that situation? It's, how much satisfaction do you feel? So it's a leading question. So Jehovah's Witnesses are being ordered to feel satisfaction in this situation.
While the ministry won't eliminate the problems that we have, Jehovah knows that working together with him in this way brings us purpose and meaning in life. It allows us to see even more ways that he can support us. The extra time that we spend with our brothers and sisters can also make it easier to focus on positive things. But can these three things still help us if we experience trials that leave us feeling as if our heart has been broken? Well, let's see how Jehovah has helped a friend of his named Malu through what she's faced, and then we'll discuss a few points. Let's watch the video together.
My name is Malumak. No one can imagine how much Jehovah has helped me. When I was 9 years old, my parents got divorced. It was terrible. I saw how my siblings were hurt. It cannot be explained how, we were very wounded in our hearts. When my parents divorced, my father was disfellowshipped. It was very hard to be separated like that. I missed my dad a lot. When my mom started to drink, I also felt abandoned. Because I knew what she had been doing, I was not surprised when after some time she was disfellowshipped. When I was 15 years old, my world fell to pieces. My father committed suicide. It's difficult to describe that my father was suddenly gone. I can't understand why he would do such a selfish thing. I missed him a lot. It was like my heart was stabbed. I was also very angry at him. Jehovah has helped me to overcome challenges through the congregation, giving me power beyond what is normal, taking me in as his daughter.
I didn't cry this time. So, let's talk about the video a little bit. What helped her to stay close to Jehovah during her trials? She said some very specific things that helped her. Sister Elizabeth?
Yeah, one thing that he says that she loved Jehovah.
Yeah, wonderful. That was the basis for everything else that she did. Great, thank you for highlighting that. Sister Smith, on Zoom, please.
Yeah, so she supplicated Jehovah to help her to stay in the truth and stay close to him, and then maintained a good study habit by studying with a sister.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, she cried out to Jehovah in long prayers, and we saw the ways the sister who studied with her supported her as well. Thank you for highlighting those two ways. Anything else that you noticed that helped her to deal with her trials?
This for me was the most chilling part of the meeting. And you have to remember, I'm coming at this from the perspective of someone who woke up from the Jehovah's Witness religion long before they started showing videos in meetings. So it's a whole new thing for me still to sit through a meeting and have the talks include propaganda videos, in this case, an extremely emotionally manipulative propaganda video. But what a video they picked. They picked a video which I've spoken about already in my rebuttals on this channel, and I don't want to repeat too much what I said in whatever rebuttal it was, however many years ago now, because I've been obviously doing this for a long time. But it goes without saying that this is a messed up story. So we have this woman named Malu who has a dysfunctional childhood. Her parents divorce. Her father is disfellowshipped, meaning that he is shunned by the congregation. As far as I'm aware, he would still have some contact with her even though he's disfellowshipped, because disfellowshipping doesn't sever the bond between a parent and a minor. So he should have still had some contact with her. Nonetheless, it would have been a devastating situation for the family. As a result of the disfellowshipping and the problems between Malu's parents, her mother turns to alcohol. Her father ends up getting reinstated as a Jehovah's Witness, and Malu tells her father that she's going to get baptized, and her father starts crying. Now, she's interpreting that, as she has every right to, as him being full of pride for his daughter. Maybe that's the case, but it's likely, in my mind, that those were tears of sadness. What if Malu's father didn't want her to get baptized? What if Malu's father had found out that it wasn't true and he didn't want this life for his daughter? And then Malu's father commits suicide, for which he is branded selfish. Now, Malu is entitled to her opinions on her father, but it's in very poor taste from an editorial point of view, for Jehovah's Witnesses to allow these remarks to be included or platformed in their propaganda material as though suicide is a quote-unquote selfish thing. It's not that simple. So what you're doing is you are stigmatizing people who have mental health problems, who have suicidal thoughts, and you're dismissing them immediately as being selfish for having those suicidal thoughts. It's an incredibly negligent message to be including in propaganda that you're making every single one of Jehovah's Witnesses around the world sit through in a meeting. It's not like this video is just on the website for people to watch if they want, as was previously the case. When they include it in the meeting outline as part of a talk that has to be given, they're forcing all Jehovah's Witnesses who attend the meetings to watch it, including children, and they're all getting this message: suicide is selfish. Again, Malu, you are entitled to your opinion, an opinion that has been heavily influenced by the involvement of Jehovah's Witnesses in your life, but you're frankly wrong, and this is dangerous rhetoric to be pushing in the faces of millions of people. A month after her father's suicide, Malu gets baptized. It's extremely telling that even before her father's suicide, Jehovah's Witnesses in her congregation were heavily involved in indoctrinating her. We don't know to what extent her parents gave consent for this, or to what extent her parents were involved in these indoctrination sessions, but it's worth just noting that Jehovah's Witnesses insist that they never arrange in their worship for children to be separated from their parents. Well, what have we just had here? We've just had, at Jehovah's Witness meetings, a video shown where a woman describes effectively being raised by Jehovah's Witnesses who were not her parents so that they could indoctrinate her as a Jehovah's Witness, even without the involvement of her parents who were disfellowshipped. And apparently, Jehovah's Witness children never get separated from their parents during worship. That's not what I'm seeing here. And this indoctrination is so successful that Malu ends up working from the age of 18 at the Remote Translation Office, or RTO, the local facilities for Jehovah's Witnesses, doing unpaid labor from the age of 18. She's been essentially groomed throughout her childhood to slave for this organization. After everything that she's been through, including the suicide of her father, who, due to her Jehovah's Witness upbringing, she has feelings of resentment towards, that I would argue are greater than she would ordinarily have. And then the guy gets up on the stage and says, "Oh, this time I managed to not cry," or something like that. I was thinking, you're just admitting that this is emotionally manipulative. You're admitting that in your first words after showing this video to your audience. "Oh, I managed not to cry." What does it say if you need to show material that might make people cry? What does it say about your message and about your religion if you need to push in people's faces material that might bring them to tears?
So like Malu, how can the words found in Psalm 34:18 bring us comfort during our trials? What do you think? Brother Renza?
Well, Sister Marla mentioned that in Psalm 34, verse 18, she felt that Jehovah was close to her the whole time she was going through these difficulties. And she said that she would continue to go to the meeting, as was mentioned before. But it's interesting how she said that she didn't want to go at times. And she even cried before the meetings. She didn't want to actually see anybody. But she knew that's where Jehovah's Spirit would be, and that's where she would get encouragement and help from. So it helps us to also receive that comfort from Jehovah by not giving up, doing what we can to come to the meetings and to be part of our group here as well, and also thinking about how our own personal feelings, sometimes we have to put aside how we might be feeling personally about some things, and just keep focused on Jehovah, and knowing that when we do that, we have Jehovah's blessing, His Spirit, and that's how Jehovah continues to comfort us.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you for highlighting those specific ways. Anything else from the verse? It talks about those being crushed in spirit. So sometimes the problems we face in life bring us to the point where maybe we feel like we can't breathe a little bit. We're feeling crushed by our trials. Jehovah promises to save us from that if we get to that point. So it's an assurance from Jehovah that will help us. How does Malu's experience show that Jehovah gives us power beyond what is normal when we experience trials? We look at her life. What did you learn from her example? Sister Young.
We looked at, we know she went through hardship. She lost probably the closest relationship that she had, but we see the outcome of everything that happened. She never left the truth. She stuck with her spiritual routine, and eventually she was able to support the regional translation office. So she stuck with Jehovah, and Jehovah has blessed her beyond measure.
Yeah, we see that definitely. Brother Terry?
And what she went through, like many of us, it's not normal. This life is not normal. We're hit with different things that are certainly abnormal, but Jehovah gives us that power beyond what we could humanly go through at that time. And it mentions there that when we experience trials especially, that's where we can see Jehovah's hand. So we live in difficult times, unusual times. They're not normal, but Jehovah gives us that power beyond what we would normally have in this system of things.
Yeah, thank you for making that contrast. I appreciate it. Just wrote down some of the phrasing that she used. She talked about being wounded in her heart, separated, abandoned, her world fell to pieces like her heart was stabbed. So despite feeling this type of way, we see how she persevered in her relationship with Jehovah and how Jehovah supported her through that. So Jehovah won't prevent our trials from happening, but he loves us all dearly and will support us through all of them if we stay close to him. So when we take full advantage of the help that he provides by means of prayer, the meetings, and our ministry, we can experience that unimaginable calmness that is a result of being Jehovah's friend. Thank you all so much for your comments and participation. We'll give our attention back to Brother Connection.
Thank you, brother, for this very encouraging part when we face the trials.
Disturbing comments, weren't they? And almost cookie cutter. There wasn't really any heart and soul in them. It's like the audience, and indeed the speaker, were just saying what they were expected to say and responding the way they were expected to respond and going through the motions and saying all of the words that they needed to say in response to, again, this grotesque video that they'd been made to sit through with their children. I mean, we heard just in those comments, one person talk about the need to put aside personal feelings in favor of serving Jehovah or muddling through trials. Just put aside your personal feelings. Your personal feelings don't matter if they're getting in the way of your service to Jehovah. And also that part about the power beyond what is normal. I think it was the speaker who said that Jehovah promises to save us in situations where we feel crushed in spirit. And he said, it might be at times like we feel like maybe we can't breathe. We're really crushed. So he's describing a mental health crisis. He's describing emotional trauma, not a whisper about going to seek professional help in that situation, even though that's no longer stigmatized for Jehovah's Witnesses. It was even recommended at their last convention. But if you're talking about that level of emotional trauma, surely you should be saying, of course, there are some situations where we might need the help of a mental health professional. No, he goes straight to Jehovah's going to save us. And as I've repeatedly argued, including this nonsense about the power beyond what is normal, what you're essentially saying to Jehovah's Witnesses is, if you can't make it through this emotionally traumatic situation, if you do find that you can't breathe and still can't breathe after praying and praying for help, if you don't find that the power beyond what is normal from Jehovah magically comes to your assistance, maybe the problem's with you.
We also have a few announcements. You're probably thinking about this, that we can be auxiliary pioneers in March and April. There is still time to apply to be auxiliary pioneer with a quota of 15 hours in the month of March and April. We encourage you to consider your circumstances under prayer and see if you can enjoy this privilege in upcoming months. We are convinced that Jehovah will richly bless our effort and sacrifice, both personally and of course as a congregation.
So this is the final part I wanted to comment on, and then we'll switch to my thoughts immediately on exiting the Kingdom Hall. There is a bit of a story here, which I don't want to spoil, but it was just interesting that the speaker was there talking about the 15-hour quota for auxiliary pioneering. As I've explained in a recent JW Watch show, Jehovah's Witnesses have adjusted their quotas. If you don't know anything about Jehovah's Witnesses, you might be thinking that when they knock on your door or when they're preaching to you, they're doing it entirely out of the goodness of their hearts and not under any kind of pressure or compulsion. It's not like they're clock watching or anything, only it turns out they are clock watching. They, in some cases, pledge to do a specific amount of hours of preaching per month. For regular pioneers, which is what I used to be, the quota has been reduced from 70 hours per month to 50 hours per month. And for auxiliary pioneers, the quota that's here being advertised is 15 hours per month. And I just found it very interesting that the brother, or the gentleman, I shouldn't say brother, that's loaded language, the gentleman who's giving this part of the meeting schedule, which is essentially right at the end when they're giving announcements, he's almost kind of pitching it as, wouldn't you like to have this particular title over these months? Because then you'll get to say, hey, I'm an auxiliary pioneer, don't you know? This really is an organization that's all about figures and statistics and putting down numbers on the board and getting to claim certain titles for yourself. I would argue that's nowhere to be found in the scriptures. If you're a Jehovah's Witness watching this, just think about this. Would Jesus really, when he sent out his disciples, be giving them our requirements or special titles depending on how many hours they could preach? Anyway, that's everything from future me or present me. I'm getting confused. Let's go back to past me with the brown hair. Okay, so that was really interesting. It's really hard to process what's just happened. Gotta take this top button. Gotta undo this shirt. Breathe. Okay, that didn't quite go as planned. I had to kind of a little bit switch strategies, because although I was sort of given a bit of a welcome when I first came in and I was running a bit late, you know, the meeting started like 2 or 3 minutes after I got into the auditorium, and as I was going to find my seat, that, you know, as you'll have heard, there were 1 or 2 who were kind of shaking my hand, which is kind of normal, a normal thing that happens in, particularly in Croatian congregation meetings. But I felt like I immediately blended in due to obviously my appearance and, you know, carrying the books and what have you. I didn't sense anyone looking at me as though I might be an outsider or an imposter. But then it kind of quickly became clear that this was not an English meeting, and I'd gone to this address expecting there to be an English meeting, and quite distracting was this noise coming from the distance where there was clearly some speaker or some other meeting going on. So I thought, I know what's probably happened. There's probably, the English meeting is probably happening in a different room in this complex. So I got up and I asked the attendant, and he confirmed that there was indeed an English meeting. And then he opened the door, and it was this tiny little room, and I counted 12 people. Actually, there were 11 people when I first went into the room. It was very interesting that there was a sister, I shouldn't use their words, there was a woman doing the sound, running the sound system, which is for Jehovah's Witnesses something they only do in emergency situations when there's a shortage of brothers. So immediately I'm learning when I walk in the room, there's a shortage of brothers in the English group for Zagreb. So anyway, I walk in, 11 people in the room, a woman doing the sound system, and I took a seat at the back, which I later figured out was someone else, was the seat of the speaker who was on the platform, and he just moved his bag once he saw that I was sat there and actually stood behind me because I was on the last row, he stood behind me for the rest of the meeting. And then what happened was, and because I was, at that point, I was thinking, well, this is interesting. I reckon I could even give some answers here, because I'm not recognizing any faces. They obviously, I mean, I detected like an Australian accent, and there was a guy who was speaking with an American accent, but mostly it was obvious that it was kind of non-native English speakers in the room. So maybe they might even appreciate, you know, some apparent brother who turns up who's giving answers, you know? That would be an interesting experiment. And I was kind of gearing up to do that. But then into the room walked my former coordinator of the body of elders. So when I first came to Croatia, and you know, like the very, very first time I came, which was on my ministerial training school reunion, I landed at Zagreb airport. I got on a bus to Sisak, and when I got off the bus in Sisak, he was the one who met me. He met me, we had coffee, and he asked me to give a talk at the next meeting. So he was my former coordinator, and yeah, there's more I could say about him, a lot more I could say about him, but you know, the relevant point is that he knew me and I knew him. You know, for a fleeting moment I entertained the thought that maybe I was unrecognizable to him, but by the end of it I was like, no, he knows exactly who I am, you know? And then so then there's this dynamic of what's going through his mind. Is he expecting me to do something? Is he expecting me to cause a scene? Is he planning on pulling me to one side at any point? That was super awkward, and I'm going to admit, quite triggering. And as I was sitting there, I was having to kind of almost brief myself on the new strategy and remind myself that this individual has no power over me whatsoever. So if he wants to pull me to one side, it's my choice as to whether I go to one side. If he asks me a question, it's my choice as to whether I answer him. Because, you know, once I'm recognized, once I'm known for who I am, you know, I have a right to answer questions or not answer questions as I see fit. So I was having to kind of brief myself, and I was honestly expecting that for the meeting to end and for him to say, hello Lloyd, you know, why are you here? And I had kind of practiced in my mind what I might say or not say, depending on how I felt. I was kind of rehearsing in my mind how that conversation would go. But by the end of the meeting, he just ghosted me. He just straight up didn't have anything to say to me, which is very interesting, because I'm pretty sure, well, it's obvious that he's an elder, so it's appropriate for elders to talk to disfellowshipped ones, you know, minimal kind of questioning perhaps, especially if they show up at a meeting for the first time in a long time. I'm also pretty sure he's heavily involved with the Croatian branch. I can't prove that, I don't know that for sure. But in any case, he basically was a family friend, and his wife was there as well. And I know quite a bit about some problems that his wife has had of a health nature, which I won't go into. It would have been appropriate, purely from an organizational kind of rulebook standpoint, for him to at least say something. But he just completely ghosted me when the last song ended. And I just decided to sing the songs because I thought, you know what, I can sing this stuff and not believe it, you know. I don't care. I'll sing the words, but I know, for me personally, it's like water off a duck's back. So sang the song, sat through or stood through the final prayer, and he just went off and started speaking to people. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna go out into the main lobby where it was obvious that the main congregation meeting was still underway. There was still like a minute or two for it to run its course. So obviously the English group had ended a little bit early. And so I just stood in the lobby and just kind of observed, because that was my new strategy. My new strategy was just to stick to the plan of observing. And I waited right until the end of their song and their prayer. And I was half expecting him to maybe at least duck his head around the door to see if I was still there. But it's almost like he was hiding in the room, or deliberately kind of hoping I would go away. I don't know how to read it. I don't know how to read it. Maybe he knew. Maybe he knows me well enough to know that I wasn't going to go running amok in his kingdom hall and causing bother, and that if I had been so minded, I would have already tried to do something along those lines. I mean, you'd have to ask him what was going through his mind. Maybe one day I'll be able to know. Maybe one day he'll wake up and we'll talk about this. But that was a very interesting, and I'm going to say it, unexpectedly triggering situation. I was kind of hoping for a bit more from it, and hopefully you'll have seen how culty some of it was. It was horrendous when they played the video with the poor girl whose father committed suicide, and she was basically raised by the organisation beyond the involvement of her parents, to the point where she was working in the regional translation office at the age of 18. And yet the organisation insists it doesn't involve itself with minors. Don't get me started on that. Oh, and the father's suicide was, quote, selfish. I remember doing the rebuttal to it. I remember doing the rebuttal years ago. And here I was in the Kingdom Hall, you know, in a room where 12 people were watching it. And the guy got up, as you'll have maybe heard, I don't know how much the microphone will have picked up, but the guy got up and said, "Oh, I managed to watch it this time without crying." Well, doesn't that tell you something? You know, doesn't that alone tell you that something is a little bit wrong? If you're having to watch with a room full of people a tear-inducing video, shouldn't that be some kind of hint that you're being played, that you're being emotionally manipulated with deliberately upsetting material? Anyway, hopefully we'll be able to edit it in such a way that you'll get a taste of what I sat through. I do feel like it was helpful because from a purely professional point of view, to sit through the meeting, as boring as it was. Sorry, I'm just parallel parking. That's what all the beeps are. I do feel it was helpful from a professional point of view to sit through the whole meeting, because it's good for me to, you know, be in the shoes of witnesses and understand their world as much as I possibly can. And going to the meetings now and then enables me to do that. It's just this particular meeting, yeah, it was a little bit close to home due to who was there and the fact that he was effectively a family friend, or used to be a family friend. And I'm not going to go into everything, but suffice to say, I think he's a nice guy, but I also know he's one of those elders that likes to go above and beyond in being intrusive. That's been my experience with him. So to be sat behind him after all these years was emotional, yeah, it's going to take me a while to process it. But I hope you found this video interesting. Heaven knows how Tibor's going to edit it all, but good luck, Tibor. And yeah, thank you for watching.